looks. Thank you so much for being here on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. We're all very excited to be here for the launch of Amber's third installment in the Netherbelt series. And we're going to start the reading with Beth. Beth Anderson is a native of Arizona and now lives in Leander, Texas. She has a husband, 2 kids, a miniature schnauzer, and more fish than anyone knows what to do with. Please welcome Beth Anderson.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Amber, and there she is, for inviting me to be here. I appreciate you having me on your big day. I'm going to read a chapter from the first book in my young adult fantasy trilogy. It's called Facing the Sun. In this chapter, Tavi, who's the main character, her magic has recently awakened, and she's a little bit overwhelmed with how all of that's going. She's 14 years old. Over a week had passed since Tavi's awakening, and she hadn't felt the slightest hint of magic since. Her classmates weren't staring anymore, at least not often, which she supposed was nice. But despite Alea's assurances to the contrary, Tavi wondered if she might be the first ever blessed person to have run out of magic right after her awakening. She was sure everyone around her was thinking the same. Going to trainings in the afternoons with Saul and Nari was wonderful, but it would be so much better if Tavi weren't so helpless during practicum sessions. Every day she stood in the room, breathing deeply, watching others for inspiration, and focusing on rousing her reticent gifts. All the while, the surrounding students turned their magic on and off as easily as opening and closing window shutters. It was embarrassing. Nadine and Alea encouraged Tavi to redouble her efforts in meditation class, but if she relaxed any more effectively, she'd be napping. On this summer morning, Tavi sat in her school classroom, drowsy from the stuffy air. She knew she should focus on Miss Maven's drowning voice, but instead Tavi's gaze wandered the room. When her eyes met Reba's, Tavi tried to look away, but she wasn't fast enough to miss the smirk Reba gave her. Tavi hated those smirks. Like Saul and Nari, Reba had a front row seat to Tavi's attempted gift development. Only Reba seemed to relish her difficulties that Tavi experienced. Tavi had hoped their friendship would be rekindled once she awakened. Clearly, she'd been not only mistaken, but also embarrassingly idealistic. Reba didn't seem interested in having a pleasant relationship with any of her former friends. Tavi wondered if that would ever change. She desperately wanted it to. The odor of chalk tugged Tavi's attention to the front of the room. At the same second, she thought, I don't usually smell chalk from my desk. She noticed other gifts awakening. It brought back an immediate, sharp memory of her first awakening, and her heart responded by initiating a frenzied beat against her chest wall. Tavi reached out a hand to Nari, who sat next to her. When her cousin saw Tavi's glowing skin, her eyes widened. Nari took the proffered hand, but it didn't help. Tavi was again pummeled by an overabundance of awareness, of teachers' voices throughout the school, Nari's blood pulsing and flowing, waves of body heat around every person in the room, vibrations from an underground stream, and diagrams in her head of how her desk was constructed. Tavi's thrumming mind struggled to remember what had happened before. First, she attempted to breathe more slowly and deeply. This wasn't easy. Her breath wanted to keep up with her heart, but she tried. Then she looked in Nari's eyes, drawing in the comfort she found there. Last, Tavi remembered Tolan's advice to focus on one gift at a time. She attempted to turn every thought toward her feet. Each person in the classroom was watching her now as her body lit up the air around her, but Tavi closed her eyes, trying to ignore the others. Her feet. The magic needed to be in her feet only. She pictured the light throughout her body flowing into her feet, and imagination became reality as magic traveled up her arms and down her neck, torso, and legs, rushing toward the floor. Tavi's gifts settled in her feet. In addition to the underground stream, she sensed the lesser vibration of a swarm of organisms moving purposefully below her. Ants. With all the other sensations gone, Tavi relished what she was experiencing through her feet. She observed a setting in society underground that was just as real as her world above. Tavi smiled in awe, and drawing on some deep instinct, she sent a message to her magic. More. At once, she felt another vibration, stronger than the water and ants, like the floor itself was moving. Tavi tried to sense what this new feeling was, but a sound broke into her consciousness. Screams. Tavi opened her eyes to see a room full of panicked students, and she realized in horror that the floor was moving, undulating like waves, the wood already splintering in places. Pictures fell off the wall, and desks hopped and danced, their contents spilling onto the living, rolling floor. The window glass cracked, and with a great crash, the slate blackboard fell, narrowly missing the teacher's feet. Nari grabbed Tavi's shoulders and cried, "Is this you?" Tavi was confused, frozen, but after several seconds, the words were absorbed into her mind and she knew the answer. She could feel her magic being sent into the building and the ground beneath. She nodded. "Lift your feet," Nari shouted. "Lift your feet." Tavi tried, but it was as if she had grown roots. Her feet refused to be moved. Then Saul was there, bending down, grabbing Tavi's ankles and pulling. His action was ineffective. Tavi's feet were still on the floor, seemingly attached there, and now the wall was cracking loudly. The building would come down soon, Tavi was certain. Her eyes filled with tears as she and Saul both pulled with all their might. Then Nari's eyes widened, and she raised her hands in front of her face. In an instant, they filled with an almost blinding light. "Move!" Nari cried, shoving Saul away. Her gifted hands grabbed her cousin's ankles, and her magic broke Tavi's connection to the ground. Tavi's feet left the floor so quickly that Nari fell backward, sliding on wooden planks that were suddenly still. Tavi's gift released all at once, as soon as Nari's glowing hands gripped her feet. To Tavi, it felt percussive, shocking, as if a clay jar of her magic had exploded, dispersing all its contents in an instant. With the room still, the students' screams transformed into panicked questions and relieved sobs. Miss Maven took control of the class, guiding everyone toward the door. Her eyes locked on her newly awakened pupil. "You stay here," she commanded. When Nari and Saul tried to remain with Tavi, Miss Maven refused, ushering them out of the classroom with everyone else. Tavi listened to the footsteps of her classmates and other students rushing through the halls toward the exits. Sitting at her desk, she felt she should cry, but she couldn't. The damaged classroom filled her with horror, but even more she felt terror at her own power and her lack of control over it. And underneath it all, she was aware of her position in the room, utterly alone. After 10 minutes, the door behind Tavi opened, and she looked back to see Miss Maven entering, followed by the headmaster, Mr. Komani. He stopped just inside the room as if he feared coming closer. "Come, Tavi," he said, his voice level. "We will take you home." The walk was silent, and when they arrived at her house, Tavi went straight to her room, ignoring her mother's questions. With the door to her bedroom closed, Tavi lay on her bed and waited. She shut her eyes, breathing deeply as Nadine had taught her to do, but instead of picturing herself on a quiet forest path or walking through the ocean's surf, Tavi relived those 2 terrible minutes over and over. It was a harrowing meditation, resulting in a growing knot of distress in her gut. When her mother entered the room, Tavi was not in the least surprised to hear that she would not be returning to school until it was deemed safe for her to do so. May tried to engage her in conversation, and then Misty attempted the same. Tavi simply lay on her side, facing the wall, giving one-word responses. "Fine," "Yes," "No," "Tomorrow," "Goodbye." At last they left her alone, and Tavi slept. So Amber asked me to tell you a little bit about my books. This trilogy here, the Sunglass Trilogy, is 3 books. And really, it's a story of growing up as a girl. It happens to take place in a magical world, but it's really all about growing up, friendships and family, and the pains of just trying to figure out what it means to be a teenager. There's also a prequel novella that can be read before or after the main series. It takes place 1,000 years before and just tells the story of somebody who was important to the history of that world. And I have a book called The Curio Cabinet. I'm always in love with my most recent book, so this is the one I'm in love with right now. Amber and I actually met on Twitter, because that's what people do these days, is they meet online. And we're both members of the Twitter writing community, which is a really great supportive group of writers on Twitter. And one thing that I do on Twitter is every day I write a very short story that fits into one tweet. I use different writing prompts for that, so they're usually about 50 words long, and they're all different genres. So it might be fantasy, but it might be horror, and it might be romance, it might be anything. And so once I'd written about 500 of these, I took 150 of my favorites and put them into this book. So each page is one tiny little story, and I love these little stories. That's what this book is. And my main series I also have on audiobook that I recorded and produced those. And back at the table, if you want to sign up for, I'm doing a drawing for all 3 of those audiobooks. So if you're interested in listening to the audiobooks, make sure you sign up. But this isn't actually about me today, it's about Amber. So I'm going to hand it back over to our MC so we can get to our main event.